The night the world almost ended began quietly, but inside Reactor 4 at Chernobyl, a ticking time bomb was about to explode. April 1986, Pripyat, a city alive with children playing and workers walking to their shifts, was completely unaware of the invisible threat looming just miles away. At the Chernobyl nuclear power plant, Reactor 4 operated under a delicate balance of pressure, temperature, and human oversight. One wrong move, one ignored alarm, one miscalculation, and it would all unravel in a catastrophic chain reaction. This is the story of the night that changed everything, of human error, of technology pushed to its limits, and of a disaster that shook the world to its core. At 1:23 a.m. on April 26, 1986, Reactor 4 at Chernobyl hummed with quiet efficiency. Inside the control room, operators prepared for a safety test that was meant to simulate a power outage. On paper, it was routine. In reality, it was a disaster waiting to happen. The team followed the procedures meticulously, unaware that the reactor's design had hidden flaws that made it dangerously unstable at low power. Alarms flickered briefly, warnings that would have seemed minor under normal circumstances. Pressure gauges fluctuated, temperature readings crept higher than they should have, and yet, the operators pressed on. Time slowed as tension built. The control rods, critical to regulating the reaction, moved slower than expected. Steam began to hiss through the pipes at unnatural speeds. The operators exchanged glances, a silent unease passing between them, though none could fully grasp the magnitude of what was about to unfold. Suddenly, an abnormal surge raced through the core. The reactor's heart, a delicate lattice of uranium and graphite, began to overheat uncontrollably. The cooling system struggled to keep up. The sound of water boiling into steam filled the room, a terrifying, almost alien roar. And then, a deafening explosion, a blinding flash. The reactor tore itself apart, sending a fireball into the night sky. The force of the blast shattered walls, knocked operators off their feet, and hurled debris across the plant. Within moments, a silent killer had been unleashed. Radiation, invisible and deadly, spreading without mercy. In the chaos, the operators could only watch. Some rushed to contain the damage, others froze in shock, realizing that nothing in their training had prepared them for this. Each heartbeat was measured against the invisible danger creeping closer with every second. The fateful night had begun, and nothing would ever be the same. The world was about to witness a disaster of unprecedented scale, a combination of human error, flawed technology, and faith converging in a catastrophic crescendo. The moment the reactor exploded, a wave of chaos swept through Chernobyl. The night sky lit up with an unnatural glow, a fiery plume rising into the darkness. Inside the plant, alarms blared relentlessly, a sound that would haunt the survivors forever. Firefighters were the first to respond, rushing toward the inferno with only basic protective gear. Many had no idea what they were truly facing. The air was thick with radioactive dust, invisible but deadly. Each step brought them closer to an invisible killer that would claim lives in hours, days, and even decades. Inside the plant, the operators scrambled to understand what had just occurred. Control panels sparked and flickered. Cooling systems were damaged or destroyed. Every second was a battle against time, against radiation, against forces no human had intended to confront. Outside, the city of Pripyat remained largely unaware. Residents slept while the invisible cloud began its silent, relentless spread. Some workers and guards tried to warn them, but the full scale of the disaster was impossible to comprehend. Back at the reactor, the damage was catastrophic. The core had ruptured, sending radioactive particles high into the atmosphere. Steam, smoke, and fire billowed outward, consuming equipment, melting metal, and destroying everything in its path. The physical explosion was terrifying, But the invisible threat was far worse. Radiation readings spiked off the charts, dosimeters failing to keep pace with the deadly energy being released. The brave men who remained at the plant faced impossible choices: stay to prevent further catastrophe or flee and survive. Many would not survive. In those first hours, the scale of the disaster was still unclear, but one fact was undeniable. Chernobyl had become the epicenter of the world's worst nuclear nightmare. The repercussions of this single night would ripple across the globe, affecting lives, politics, and the very perception of nuclear power for generations to come. As the explosion's fireball died down, the human toll began to emerge. The first responders, firefighters, and plant workers bore the brunt of the disaster. Many had no idea the invisible killer they faced, radiation, could silently and relentlessly destroy their bodies from the inside. Symptoms appeared almost immediately: nausea, dizziness, and burning sensations that no medicine could relieve. Some collapsed in the streets, their skin reddened, their energy drained in moments. Others carried on, driven by duty, unaware that each step was stealing precious hours, days, or even weeks of their lives. Families in Pripyat remained in the dark, oblivious to the invisible clouds spreading above them. Parents tucked their children into bed, workers returned home after shifts, and the city continued its ordinary rhythm, all under the shadow of a danger they could not see, smell, or hear. The plant workers faced impossible choices. Some stayed behind to stabilize systems, while others fled in fear. Those who approached the reactor to contain the damage were exposed to lethal levels of radiation, sometimes for only minutes, yet that was enough to guarantee severe illness or death. Even in hospitals, chaos reigned. Doctors and nurses treated victims with little understanding of what they were facing. Protective measures were minimal. Knowledge about radiation poisoning was limited. The human cost was not just immediate, it would echo for decades, affecting survivors, their families, and generations to come. Every story told from that night carries the weight of courage, desperation, and tragedy. Heroes emerged, risking everything to prevent an even greater catastrophe, while others suffered in silence, their lives forever changed. Chernobyl was no longer just a technical disaster. It had become a human tragedy, a sobering reminder of how fragile life is when faced with forces beyond comprehension. With the reactor still burning and radiation levels climbing to deadly heights, the urgent question became, how do you stop a disaster that cannot be touched? Engineers, scientists, and soldiers were thrown into an impossible fight against an invisible enemy. Every decision carried life or death consequences. Helicopters hovered above the shattered reactor, dropping tons of sand, boron, and other materials intended to smother the core and slow the reaction. Each pilot knew the risks: radiation doses that would be fatal within hours. Still, they flew, guided by duty and the desperate hope of containing what seemed uncontrollable. On the ground, crews built the first makeshift containment structures. Concrete was poured, steel reinforced. But every attempt to shield the reactor felt painfully insufficient. Radiation seeped through protective barriers, invisible and insidious. Workers monitored readings with instruments that beeped faster than anyone could process, warning of levels that no human body was meant to endure. Despite the danger, remarkable ingenuity emerged. Engineers improvised, soldiers obeyed orders with precision, and ordinary men performed extraordinary acts of courage. Some worked for hours, exposed to lethal doses simply to prevent an even larger catastrophe. Others succumbed quietly, their bravery acknowledged only in fleeting whispers. Yet containment was not immediate. the reactor continued to release radioactive particles, the invisible cloud spreading across the plant and into the surrounding land. Each measure bought precious time, but it was a temporary victory in a battle that would leave scars for generations. Chernobyl's containment efforts revealed both the fragility and resilience of humanity. In the face of a disaster that defied comprehension, people risked everything, confronting a silent enemy that could kill without warning, without mercy, and without distinction. Amid the chaos and destruction, one of the most terrifying discoveries awaited those brave enough to enter Reactor 4. Deep within the heart of the wreckage lay what would come to be known as the Elephant's Foot, a mass of molten nuclear fuel, concrete, and steel fused together in a nightmarish form. This lump of radioactive material was unlike anything anyone had seen. It radiated at levels so extreme that a single minute in its proximity could be fatal. Yet engineers and scientists had no choice but to study it, to understand what had happened, and to plan the next steps to prevent further disaster. The Elephant's Foot was a stark reminder of the reactor's destructive potential. It was alive with invisible energy, searing and lethal, yet silent, motionless, and deceptively calm. Those who approached it had to contend with the deadly reality that this mass was a force that could kill in moments, yet it had been born from human error, hubris, and flawed design. Over time, measurements revealed its staggering power. Instruments failed, readings skyrocketed, and yet the curiosity and determination of humanity pushed experts to get closer. Their findings would inform containment strategies, safety protocols, and the understanding of nuclear disasters for decades to come. The Elephant's Foot was more than a physical object. It was a symbol of hubris, of human fallibility, and of the raw, uncontrollable power of the atom. Those who studied it knew they were confronting a force far beyond ordinary comprehension, a force that had changed not only the reactor, but the world's understanding of nuclear risk forever. As radiation continued to spread silently through the air, the authorities faced an impossible task: evacuating an entire city without triggering panic. Pripyat, home to nearly 50,000 residents, was still largely unaware of the invisible danger above them. Initially, many dismissed the warnings. Life had always followed a predictable rhythm, and the idea that an invisible cloud could bring death seemed unfathomable. But by the morning of April 27th, the truth could no longer be ignored. Orders were given. The city must be evacuated immediately. Buses rolled through the streets, collecting families who clutched their belongings, confused, frightened, and unsure of what awaited them. Some residents were told it was only a temporary measure, a few days at most. No one explained the true danger of radiation, its long-term consequences, or the lives that would be forever altered by this decision. The evacuation of Pripyat marked a turning point in the disaster. It was the moment when the human dimension of Chernobyl became painfully real, families uprooted, lives interrupted, and the long shadow of radiation beginning to reach across borders, touching countless lives far beyond the reactor walls. The radioactive cloud from Chernobyl did not stay confined to Ukraine. Carried by winds across borders, it drifted silently over Europe, contaminating towns and farmland far from the reactor itself. At first, the extent of the fallout was unclear. Instruments detected radiation, but governments struggled to understand the scale of the disaster. The Soviet government, desperate to control information, downplayed the event. Official statements assured citizens that everything was under control. Yet scientists monitoring radiation levels knew the truth. A deadly plume was spreading, invisible and relentless, affecting millions. Countries from Scandinavia to Central Europe issued warnings, monitored air, milk, and water, and scrambled to protect their populations. Panic rippled quietly among those who understood the invisible threat, while many remained unaware, living ordinary lives under the shadow of something they could not see. The disaster sparked fear, debate, and international scrutiny. Scientists, journalists, and governments confronted an unprecedented challenge: how to respond to a nuclear event on this scale without triggering mass hysteria. Every measurement, every precaution was a race against an invisible enemy moving faster than anyone could stop. Chernobyl's fallout demonstrated that nuclear disasters do not respect borders. The damage was global, both physically and psychologically. Fear of radiation touched entire continents, raising questions about the safety of nuclear power, the transparency of governments, and the true cost of human error when dealing with forces beyond control. The world had witnessed something terrifying. A single night at a single reactor had changed the perception of nuclear energy forever, and the invisible consequences would be felt for decades to come. As the world grappled with the aftermath of Chernobyl, another layer of the disaster began to emerge: the secrets and controversies that had been buried beneath layers of government control. The classified documents, survivor testimonies, and leaked reports painted a darker picture than what had been publicly acknowledged. The Soviet leadership had initially suppressed the full extent of the disaster. Radiation levels were minimized, the severity of health impacts understated, and the dangers faced by first responders and nearby residents largely concealed. People who tried to warn others often faced ridicule, dismissal, or worse. Even decades later, mysteries remain. Some claim that entire sections of the reactor were improperly documented, that dangerous experiments had been conducted in secret, and that crucial decisions were made to protect the reputation of the state rather than the lives of its citizens. Survivors' accounts reveal harrowing details: hazmat suits that were inadequate, measurements ignored, and exposure far beyond what anyone had anticipated. Engineers, firefighters, and scientists risked death, often without proper information, training, or protective equipment. The controversies surrounding Chernobyl go beyond the technical. They raise uncomfortable questions about human hubris, accountability, and the cost of secrecy in the face of unprecedented danger. The disaster was not only a failure of technology, but also a failure of transparency, trust, and the systems that were meant to protect people. Chernobyl remains a cautionary tale, a reminder that the truth can be as dangerous as the disaster itself, and that some secrets, once hidden, can haunt generations long after the flames have died down. Decades have passed since the explosion at Chernobyl, but its legacy remains vivid and haunting. The reactor's ruins stand as a stark reminder of what can happen when technology, human error, and secrecy collide. The exclusion zone stretches for miles, a silent testament to the scale of the disaster and the lives it affected. The health impacts continue to ripple through generations. Thyroid cancers, radiation sickness, and psychological trauma are only part of the story. Families were uprooted, communities destroyed, and memories of normal life forever erased. For some, the past is an invisible burden, lingering long after the initial catastrophe. Yet from tragedy comes knowledge. Engineers, scientists, and policymakers learned lessons that reshaped nuclear safety worldwide. Protocols were rewritten, reactors redesigned, and global monitoring of nuclear power became more rigorous. Humanity's understanding of radiation, containment, and disaster management expanded, saving countless lives in the decades since. Chernobyl also stands as a cautionary tale. It warns of the limits of human control, the consequences of arrogance, and the dangers of prioritizing secrecy over safety. The elephant's foot, the abandoned city, and the stories of bravery and sacrifice all remind us that some disasters cannot be undone, only remembered and studied. Today, Chernobyl has a dual identity, a symbol of devastation and a source of scientific insight. Wildlife has returned, forests have reclaimed the land, and researchers cautiously study the reactor and its effects. But the lessons remain clear. Vigilance, transparency, and respect for the power we wield are essential. The night the world almost ended was not just a historical event. It was a stark reminder that human choices have consequences beyond imagination. And as we study, explore, and understand, we honor the lives affected and ensure that the horrors of Chernobyl are never forgotten. If you enjoyed this video and are still not subscribed, please consider it, as it really helps me out a lot. Thank you.